still here.
We are. Like a couple of bad pennies.
It is still day one
It is day one.
of our broadcast at Supercomputing. That means it is Tuesday, November 16th, for those of you watching an archive version of the show. And it's actually Tuesday, November 16th, for those of you watching a live version of the show, too. So that it works both ways. And we're continuing our discussion with my favorite community, which is the education community.
And it is mine as well.
I know it's yours.
And the question we have for both of you, dear friends, is what got you involved?
Wait.
What?
We haven't introduced our guests.
You should do that.
Our guests today are Dr. Henry Neiman, who will be chair of supercomputing education, SC Education in 2011.
That's right.
And your role this year?
I'm the deputy chair for the education program this year, which means that I follow around the chair and try and figure out how I'm going to do all that work next year.
Speaking of which,
And my name is Charlie Peck. I've been involved in the education program for a number of years now as an instructor, as a leader, as chair in 09, and I'll be helping Henry next year in 11.
Good thing, too.
Now, and what got you two involved in this?
The National Computational Science Institute.
That's right.
2002, I took my first workshop in Dayton, Ohio on computational thinking across the disciplines, roughly speaking, and I was exposed to Bob Panoff and his educational approach in terms of how you can bring computational thinking into any science discipline. And I was hooked. By the next summer, I was an instructor, and then I became involved thanks to Scott Lathrop as part of the education program.
So, ditto, actually. So, except mine was in St. Louis. Yeah. In fact, that's where I met you, Tom.
It was. My story was almost the same as
Yeah,
Charlie's.
it's quite
Except
astonishing,
there
isn't
was
it?
this irritant that I met. I mean, this delightful person that I met there.
I believe that was Paul Gray.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I went to the workshop. It was one of the first, but apparently
Well, no,
not the first.
Well, yeah.
No,
Parallel
there was another
computing
one.
workshop.
Yeah, we picked up one before
It
that.
was in summer of 2003 at Washington University in St. Louis. I had a great time, but I spent the whole time wishing I was teaching rather than sitting in the audience, because I got into supercomputing to feed my teaching habit, not the other way around. And so I decided that I would poll or probe the instructors and see whether they wanted anyone else to help the next time. And they said, yes, we're going to do this again next year, so let us know if you're available. And the following year I hosted the workshop at my institution, the University of Oklahoma, and you were there.
And there was never before or since a better hoster. You can
Wow.
get people, too, in the seats.
Oh yeah,
Like
well,
any other.
so
we call you the king of butts in the seats.
that's right. So
I thought it was just the king of butts.
if you
Anyway, go on,
want
Henry.
if you want supercomputing education spam, I am your guy. So I have a mailing list. It's about 2,300 people now. And the great thing is, when you have a mailing list of 2,300 people, if you need 10 of them, you can probably get them. So we've been very successful getting people to show up for events. So this past summer, we hosted the first intermediate parallel computing workshop at OU, and I think we had 27 finally who came. A significant fraction of them from Oklahoma, which was great because it was partially funded by an organization within Oklahoma called Oklahoma EPSCoR. And we had a fantastic time teaching a topic that we'd never taught before in a way that we had no idea what we were doing. And yet it was
Sounds
very
familiar.
I know, and it was very successful. People came away from it understanding the material a lot better. And in fact, I came away from it understanding the material a lot better.
Something you pioneered that I've always liked is the rounds idea.
Oh, sure. So one of the things that we figured out fairly early was, because I'm not regular faculty, I'm an adjunct in computer science because I teach a course for them, but I'm not really in a position to make major curriculum changes in a department that I'm not full-time faculty in. So I realized that if I wanted to teach high-performance computing, what I was going to need to do was teach it in an informal way. And so we created a series of workshops called Supercomputing in Plain English. It's now grown to 11 roughly hour-long presentations, starring me, usually, during which we cover the concepts underlying parallel computing and the storage hierarchy, high performance computing in general, but we don't drill down real deep into the technical details. And instead what we do is we follow that up where, well, the way it used to work was if you had some project that needed supercomputing, I'd come to your office for an hour a week, and we would do this until you were where you needed to be. Well, that was a great way to do things. We called this rounds, after hospital rounds, where the doctors go around and visit all the patients. It was great until I had 20 groups in the same semester, and we just plain ran out of Henry hours. So we switched to a help session approach, where I would sit in a PC lab in the middle of campus, and people would come on a drop-in basis, and that worked great. Except that I started to run out of time to do that. Well, one of the folks who had gotten interested in what we were doing started coming to these help sessions and just sitting in to see what was going on, and then he started helping, and then he started being in charge. So Josh Alexander, who now works for us at the OU Supercomputing Center for Education Research, OSCER, he sort of learned by doing and by watching how to provide supercomputing rounds. Then he taught the rest of our organization how to do it, and I literally have not done that for a year and a half. Instead, I had a baby. Well, my wife had a baby.
You had a cow.
But I helped a little.
Small amount.
Yeah, you know. Stop that. And so it's been, in some ways, very freeing for me because I don't have to put in what typically was working out to be about 7 hours a week doing these sessions. On the other hand, I miss it because it is a lot of fun to work with the scientists, the engineers, both faculty and I think especially students. It's tremendously rewarding to work with the students, teaching them how to put ideas into practice in their particular area.
So what you're saying about students and about Josh and about us, I mean, it is this progression from being introduced to it to really learning it when we have to teach it, in a sense.
Well, and in fact, I think anybody who's taught any amount understands that the best way to learn a thing is to teach it to someone else. And so for me, I think I understand parallel computing, high performance computing vastly better because I've had to discipline myself to figure out a way to explain it to people who know nothing at all about it. And that's been hugely rewarding, partly for the fun of the teaching it, but partly because now I actually can have an intelligent conversation about at least some of it.
But I think that's an unexpected, wonderful attribute of our NCSE, National Computational Science Institute, workshops.
That's right. And in fact, I think we've seen this process occur with a number of people, and I believe later in the week, one of the guests on the show is going to be Dan Ernst from the University of Wisconsin-Eau Claire, and he's another story of, I started a year ago by taking a workshop, or 2 years ago, excuse me, and this year I'm teaching workshops and teaching for the education program at SC. That's a fairly common story, and one that I think we can be very proud of because this quick progression from consuming to producing, I think, is fairly uncommon in situations like this. Normally you go home and one of two things happens. Either you forget everything you learned and the materials get buried on the pile on the desk and it's kind of gone, or you work very hard at your local institution to add value, but not much beyond that. And one of the things that we've seen is adding the value nationally.
Yeah, so what's the secret sauce there that allows you to supercharge?
Oh, heck if I know.
I think we do know to some extent. We are examples, so the people who are instructors have this same story to tell.
Right.
The instructors are not brought in from some external entity where they live in rarefied air and come out periodically and dispense their knowledge to the masses. They are faculty at institutions just like the participants have. We can say we were a participant in this workshop 4 years ago, right? It's easy to imagine yourself doing something if you see someone else that looks and has that same background and has accomplished it, right? That same thing. And so the instructors at the workshop have done this before. We were participants, and now we are instructors, we are leading the education program. So for the participant, the first time participant in the workshop, it doesn't seem like an enormous stretch if the 4 people standing in front of the room working with them that week have done the same thing.
And you know what your students need because you were in that position.
Exactly.
not so long ago.
And I think another part of the secret sauce is that we involve students from the get-go in every aspect of what we do. They help us develop and test curriculum. They're assistants at workshops. It creates an environment that reduces some of the hierarchy and lets people just learn and get the pleasure of the learning and the pleasure of the applying it, as Henry says, to some problem, and then having a colleague, whether it's a student, another faculty member, who had that same experience back at that institution. If you're a onesie, you may atrophy and die. Your Henry's model of it sits on the shelf and collects dust. But if you have a colleague that went there with you, there's a certain support system that you get. There's a certain guilt, if you will, right? When you see them in the hallway, hey, have you done anything with that stuff? Well, no. And this feeds that growth.
And to continue the secret sauce metaphor, one thing which would be really cool, and which we're actually kind of talking about, although it's really premature to go into too much detail since we don't know ourselves yet, but is in a sense of bottling the secret sauce and perhaps shipping it.
Uncle Paul's Tabasco.
No, but seriously, talking about because the workshops now are based very heavily on the kind of dynamic you get with person-to-person, hands-on with the student thing. And to start learning how to go a little beyond that so that we can be teaching folks in Seattle next year at SC11, but also maybe people in Wichita or something.
Henry has done this with his supercomputing in plain English, right? Canned, ready to go, watch it either live or pre-recorded. We've worked twice in the past with our workshops where we had 2 locations for a workshop, right? So this was synchronous, shoulder surfer here, people here. We're now just beginning to explore how we might scale that out, right? And it scales in some sense in multiple dimensions in that we'd like to reach more people, both people that are remote in synchronous participation, but also people who are asynchronous and watching this after it's been produced and published, but also laterally in terms of, if you go back historically, this started out as parallel and cluster computing and computational thinking.
Right.
It's now also computational biology for biologists, computational chemistry for chemists, computational engineering for engineerists.
Engineers.
One of those.
Better.
We would like to expand to the humanities, arts, and social science. There are lots of economists who use these types of techniques, right? So not only would we like to be able to reach more people geographically, but we'd also like to be able to reach more people across disciplines as well.
And if you're talking another dimension too, over time, because what's interesting here is the fact that when you do your workshops, the students pass through, it's great, they become teachers, and then they're bringing that out, and the duration of their knowledge persists because they're training new people too.
Exactly.
That's a little harder with the canned, typically, because it's often kind of just a one-on-one with the computer screen or with the video. So learning how to also create that same kind of dynamic among those people.
Yep.
Would be
Completely agreed.
Before our time's up, you mentioned the students.
Correct.
You also mentioned shoulder surfing. I want you to explain shoulder surfing a little bit. Wait, but not quite yet. Fearlessness is another thing that you brought to the game. It evidenced itself in both the BCCD that you've helped lead the students with and the Little Fee. I'd like you to, for me, those are all part of the package.
So the quick bit is that Little Fee is a small portable cluster that's an educational appliance for teaching parallel and cluster computing. There'll be a session focusing on this later in this series, Teach Parallel series. The bootable cluster CD is the software stack that runs on it that makes it, again, low friction, easy to teach parallel and cluster computing in a variety of contexts. High school, college, to teach faculty how to teach it. The notion of shoulder surfing is that when we teach, we are not talking heads for an hour. We are presenting material for half an hour and then giving a lab session that requires them to actually apply what we've been teaching them to an actual problem and work through it. And what we've learned is that a certain number of people walking around the room, looking over shoulders, helping answer questions is a great way to ensure that people don't get frustrated and they can move through the material. Those tend to be our students who then graduate to be instructors and then go on to lead similar efforts independently of us. And that is speaking as an educator, one of the most gratifying things that I can see.
And it's another, I think, very unique part of this thing we've helped create.
No argument.
Gentlemen, and I say that with all sincerity, thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Appreciate it.